chair now recognizes Mr. Foss, our final panelist, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing today and for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the state of Idaho Department of Lands. I'm Craig Foss, Idaho State Forester, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today regarding the relationship of drought, wildfire, and our federal, state, and private forests. As State Forester for the Idaho Department of Lands, I oversee the forestry and fire programs for the state of Idaho. IDL staff provide professional assistance to the citizens of Idaho, enabling them to use, protect, and sustain their natural resources while protecting soil and water quality, reducing the risks of catastrophic wildfire, and providing access to necessary use of fire for forest restoration and community protection. Idaho's forest lands are essential to providing drinking water for all Idahoans. Healthy forests bring increased water supplies through snow retention in mountain headwaters and increased stream shading. Unhealthy and fire damaged forests bring water quality and quantity issues. Healthy, resilient forests can withstand naturally occurring disturbances such as insect and disease outbreaks, wildfire, and drought. Idaho's national forests comprise 80% of our state's forest land. Of these more than 20 million acres of federal forests, 12.8 million are designated as suitable for management. And of those 12.8 million acres, 75%, more than 8 million acres, are in declining condition, leaving them at high risk of insect disease and wildfire mortality. Idaho, like much of the West, is experiencing wildfire seasons that are 30 to 60 days longer due to the changing climate. We can't change the weather, but we can change the condition of our forests. In Idaho, we've entered into shared stewardship and good neighbor authority agreements with the goal of doubling the number of acres treated and restored on our most at-risk federal forest lands. Adjacent industrial and family forest land will also be treated, assuring landscape-scale forest health improvements. These agreements involve a wide array of federal, state, county, NGO, and other private interests. Treatments will include harvest of commercially viable forests, prescribed fire on landscapes that are not suitable for mechanical treatments, and reforestation with suitable forest species. Federal and state nurseries have capacity, but they lack funding to significantly increase seedling production to meet the increased reforestation needs across the West. The goal of reforestation is removal of dead and dying trees and the thinning of overcrowded forests and ladder fuels contributing to wildfire spread, thus assuring the remaining healthy trees have access to increasingly limited water supplies and making more water available for aquifer recharge. Idaho is fortunate to have a strong forest industry with forestry consultants, logging contractors, lumber mills, and seedling nurseries serving an integral role in this restoration effort. It will take many years to address the extensive restoration work needed to restore and protect our forested watersheds, both in Idaho and throughout the Western United States. This can't be accomplished without consistent national policy support. It will require increased funding for climate change research, active forest management, wildfire mitigation, increased use of prescribed fire, and reforestation. Additionally, the Trillion Trees Act, the Resilient Federal Forests Act, the Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act, the Rural Forest Markets Act, and the National Prescribed Fire Act all contain important policy and funding tools needed by federal and state forestry agencies engaged in these essential forest restoration efforts. These are all important policy initiatives, and the more they can be streamlined, the more efficiently the directives can be implemented by agencies on the ground. The critical point that I want to stress today is that managed forests are healthy forests. They're better able to withstand wildfire, pests, and drought, and they're more capable of storing carbon, providing clean air, water, wildlife habitat, economic and recreational opportunities, and countless other benefits. Forests, water, and people are dependent upon one another. I look forward to answering your questions today. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify.
The chair now recognizes the Dean of the House, Congressman Don Young from Alaska, for 5 minutes.
And Mr. Foss, in your comment, you mentioned that 75% of the forest acres suitable for management in Idaho are declining in conditions. You also mentioned the need for policy support. What kind of support can we do as a Congress for you?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. You know, there a couple things. You know, the wildfire funding fix was enacted, came into place a few years ago. One of the expectations with the wildfire funding fix was that with funds that had been diverted when the suppression side of the Forest Service and BLM ran out of money, resources were diverted from other programs, forest management programs on the National Forest System side, and then the state and private funds that came to states for forest management. Those funds were being diverted. With the wildfire funding fix, the intent and the thought was that without that diversion taking place, those funds would be available for forest mitigation and hazard fuel reduction efforts. And it is absolutely critical that we be much more aggressive in terms of managing those hazardous fuels and not putting all of our resources just into suppression. So that's one area, is to fully implement the wildfire funding fix as was intended. You know, a second really has to do with our license to operate on the landscape, and that has to do with litigation of forest projects that have been planned collaboratively and are part of a national forest 5 to 10 year forest management plan. They've been through a collaborative process. That group has agreed to the management activities that are moving forward. They've conducted the environmental analysis on those projects, and then those projects are litigated by someone outside of that collaborative process. And what that means is projects that everyone has agreed are essential to treating that landscape are not able to be treated because they're tied up in court. And so that really needs to be addressed as well.
I thank you for your comment. I happen to agree that I live through this. Every time we have a managed agreed sale, it's sued by some group on this. Mr. Chairman won't agree with me because he's a lawyer, but I would suggest respectfully, we ought to look at this and see how it's being misused, because you can't manage forest if you're continually stopped by doing so by groups that have really no interest or worked in the negotiation. It's something we ought to look at, because we can't have our cake and eat it too. We have a group of people who say you can't cut any trees down. This is awful. We have a group of people who got to cut them down. I'm just saying, let's look at, we have to manage the forest so we have not only water availability, but a healthy forest. So I thank you for your comment.
Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Westerman for 5 minutes.
Mr. Foss testified about the importance of forestry, and I think people often overlook that. And Mr. Foss, I've been able to visit it's called the Micro Study Project up in northern Idaho, where it looked at the effects of forest management on water quality. I know there's been a lot of studies like that in the past, but can you maybe inform the committee just how significant forestry management is to water supply, and what kind of percentages and increases in water availability could we be looking at if we would simply do the management that we should be doing anyhow?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. You know, one of the situation that we're facing on our forests is due to lack of management, they're severely overstocked. And when you have a dwindling water supply, every plant out there on that landscape and that ecosystem is competing for that increasingly limited amount of water. And so our goal in forest management isn't to eliminate all the trees. It's our goal in forest management is to go into those stands that are overstocked and thin those stands so that you have the right species of trees on that landscape at the right spacing, so that the trees you want on the landscape can compete for that limited supply of water. And then rather than having trees that you don't need, that aren't healthy, that are competing for that moisture, when those have been eliminated, the water's going to the trees you want, and then the remaining water is made available to go into the water system, into streams and into aquifer recharge. So that's the essence of forest management. And the other benefit to that is that you're taking an unhealthy forest that oftentimes ends up being a carbon emitter, and you're creating forests that are growing healthy and vigorously. They're capturing more carbon dioxide from the air, creating oxygen, and they're becoming carbon sinks, which is something we've all identified as being essential. I think as far as
you get multiple benefits. You get multiple benefits from that. And could you also elaborate just a little bit more? If you've got an overstocked stand, do some trees get all the water they need and other trees just give it up, or is the water kind of automatically ratioed out among all of the trees so that none of them get the water they need?
Thank you. Yeah, really, it's a competitive system, and what you end up with is all the trees competing for that limited water source. And so you end up with an overall stand that's much less healthy, much more susceptible to insect and disease outbreaks, insect and disease that are naturally occurring in the landscape. And in a healthy ecosystem, those trees can withstand those existing insect and disease threats. In an unhealthy situation,
it's detrimental to all stand or all trees in the stand when there's limited water supply. And I would love to discuss this more, but I see I'm out of time.
The chair now recognizes a gentleman from the San Joaquin Valley, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
And that will be my last question for the gentleman who I think did a very good job in his testimony on managing our forests. I think we have done a poor job in managing our forests for decades now, Mr. Foss. We had a hearing with the subcommittee last fall in the middle of these devastating fires that we had throughout California and throughout the West. And as you noted, we're spending more money on fire suppression than we are on managing our forest lands. The department, and I've brought this up to Secretary Vilsack, estimated in a hearing we held last fall that we need $2 to $3 billion annually to really update the U.S. forest management plan. Clearly, we noted in the water supply that we lacked here in California because of the devastating drought, that the trees are suffering. What would your suggestion be?
Well, again, I don't work for the federal government, but I can tell you we have an 80 million acre problem that we're trying to deal with. And I just outlined the severity of the challenge that we're dealing with here in Idaho. And we absolutely do. I mean, suppression resources are essential because we have people out on the landscape and we need to protect them. But we have to do something about the future of this, and we have to start trying to manage away from these problems. And we can do that both through forest harvest, but also through prescribed fire and treating the right landscapes in the right places. If I treat 1,000 acres, I might protect 10,000 acres by treating that right 1,000 acres. And so being really strategic about the acres we're treating, that's a huge emphasis by all states.
With that, I'll recognize Ms. Napolitano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a whole slew of questions. I probably will submit them to have them answered in writing. But to Mr. Foss in Idaho, do you have enough funding for taking care of the forest maintenance?
Thank you for the question. We don't have sufficient funding to double the number of acres treated. Our goal is to double the number of acres treated. How we're achieving that is through using all the resources and all the tools that are available to us.
What would be required? What funding would be required for the federal government to help you achieve that?
I think approving some of the initiatives that you folks are considering, like the Trillion Trees Act, the Resilient Federal Forests Act, the Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act, and the Rural Forest Markets Act, all would be programs that we would use in partnership with the federal agencies, the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. Those would all provide the resources we need And the other thing I guess I would say is even with millions of dollars, if we don't deal with the NEPA litigation issue, we can have all kinds of money, but we can't get the work done on the landscape because those projects are litigated. So it really requires both. And I apologize if that's not specific enough, but that's the reality of the situation we face. And thank you for
Do you
the
mind
question.
sending that information to the committee, please?
Absolutely. Thank you.